Hi, people. So before I get into the subject matter of this one, just a little disclaimer, I'm going to be away for a while, i.e. I won't be uploading videos. I will be doing live streams for roughly 3.5 weeks, 20 days, 21 days. Basically, I'm going to the Philippines. This has been a trip that I planned for some time. It's very important personally. I'm not going to go into details about it in this video. I may do so later on. But suffice to say, it's got a connection to previous issues I've spoken about. I'm really looking forward to it. I haven't travelled as much as I would have liked in recent years, and this is a big one. Actually, it's the longest distance I've ever travelled via Dubai and Singapore. And I'll be in Manila in a few days. So it's a big thing. Anyway, I mean, I'll probably have this laptop, but it's unlikely I'll be uploading videos because I'll be focusing on other things. So, that's just a little disclaimer. Now, to get into the video subject, there'll be a lot to say about politics and about this situation that the country's in at the moment. But for now, I just want to focus on one thing, which hopefully will be interpreted as somewhat balanced. Um, I made no secret of the fact I didn't vote for the Conservatives. Um, and there's aspects of conservative thinking I really don't like, and certainly Tory policy area I strongly dislike. I've been very vocal about what I feel is a callous approach to welfare, particularly around sanction culture. I think there's far, far too much focus on that. And I don't unsay anything that I have said. And I maintain that without question, in the last 14 years, there have been people pushed over the edge as a result of the Tories pushing the sanction culture. I think it's a glaring indictment of Tory rule. And it started from the beginning. Not that New Labour was perfect in this regard, but the Tories exacerbated it. Now, with any government, you're going to get positives and negatives. And I think sometimes in this country, we're actually a little bit too negative, particularly the media. I think there is this tendency to just go for negative stories too much. And I think sometimes this idea of holding power to account is conflated with just overt negativity. Where there is achievements, where there is positive things, that should be welcomed. Um, no government's going to get it absolutely right. I think even with the greatest glossing over, it's hard to point to any resounding achievements of the last 14 years. I'm sure there will be conservative activists, conservative party members who will say, oh, but this, and this. Well, I'm not going to cover everything in this video, and I'm not saying they're right or wrong. I'm sure they'll be able to produce some argument for that. What I'm going to do is talk about where I feel they did get some things right. Um, and it was a little bit of a struggle because, frankly, there isn't a lot to point to. But there are some things I think we could say, well, that's better than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And certainly the ruling party has to take some credit for that. So without further ado, I'm just going to highlight some of these things. Okay, so justice. This is a big hot button issue that I feel very strongly about. Um, it's hard to say that much has improved in this area. Prisons are overcrowded. That's a crisis at the moment. Court backlog, and people feel as disillusioned as ever. The trust in the police is at an all-time low, although I would put all of them on the government for that one. But what did they get right? Well, there is slightly more transparency. I mean, sentencing is now televised, so we at least see why judges reach the sentencing that they do. In the past, that wasn't the situation, so that's welcome. In some areas, there have actually been tougher sentences. Not enough, in my opinion. There's still too many serious crimes, particularly around violent young offenders, that don't get the penalty they deserve. But nevertheless, there are some areas where it has improved slightly in terms of um, sentencing that fits the crime a bit better, but it's not nothing to shout about. For example, in some sexual crimes, sentencing has increased a little bit, but it's still nowhere near good enough. Victims have had a greater say in parole hearings. That's something Dominic Raab brought in. I give him credit for that. So, there's very marginal improvements, but I do think it's marginal. I don't think it's anything to shout about. overall crime. It depends what area you look at. This is one of those things that people can sort of tamper with statistics. Actually, Britain is one of the safest countries in the world in terms of homicides. You know, we're way, way down at the bottom. Um, Not quite as safe as Japan, but you know, we're definitely in the lower tier of countries when it comes to that sort of crime. Nevertheless, people don't feel safe. People don't feel confident if they call the police. So there are a lot of issues around that. But I would say there's been very slight improvements. But with this one, I honestly believe it goes beyond any government. You know, no matter what electioneering slogans there are, no matter what promises, no matter what um, policy directives, ultimately, I think this is part of the judicial establishment. I think the culture needs to change. I think that the courts, judges, the sentencing council, they're all part of it as well. Because people often take out anger on politicians, and yes, politicians are legislators, they set the rules, but they don't have absolute power. They don't have a say on everything. Um, you know, if you were to write to the Ministry of Justice and express frustration at the way sentencing is, what they will do is turn around and say they respect the independence of the judiciary, which is important in a democracy. But my point is there isn't enough accountability with judges, with the sentencing council. I mean, who are these people answerable to? Each other, basically. The sentencing council will say that they had public consultation. I, you know, how much of that do they actually act on? I am not convinced. I don't think the Court of Appeal listens to the public um, anywhere near as much as it should. So I find it very disheartening. But like I say, I'm not going to just blame the Tories for this. Labour's not going to get this right either. I don't think any government will get this absolutely right. But we do need to restore a lot more confidence in the system. And that isn't just the government. That, I think, comes to the legal system, the legal establishment starting to listen to the public and getting out of its bubble. Okay, diversity and tolerance. Now, the Tories have often been attached to culture wars and anti-wokeism, which actually I think a lot of it they're right about. I abhor the intolerance of woke dogma. Um, and on issues like trans dogma, I think the Tories are basically right. I think they've got that right. I think they were right to stop treatment for under 18s in England and Wales, puberty blockers. I don't know what Labour's going to do on that one. They might reverse some of that, which would be a big mistake. Um, but overall, just in terms of Britain being a diverse and tolerant country, I do think as a society we are more tolerant overall and more diverse. The Conservatives, from David Cameron onwards, have had the most diverse cabinets in history, literally. Certainly in terms of ethnic diversity. So it's one thing the left cannot throw at the Tories anymore. When I see people calling the Tories racist, I think, well, wait a second. You may not like their immigration policies, but look at the cabinet. I mean, it's one thing they've greatly improved on. This is not to say that you won't find pockets of racism or bigotry within Tory ranks, but I genuinely think, and David Cameron has to take some credit for this, I genuinely think the Tories have progressed in that regard from the past on issues like gay rights. David Cameron brought in gay marriage, you know, so there were developments and things like that that a lot of people would say is progressive. So I do think they need to take some credit for that. Of course, they're not the only ones. There'll be a lot of issues here to do with how lobby groups operate, how society, individuals change their thinking, etc. But the government is part of it. So yeah, I do give them some credit. I think overall for the most part, Britain is a more tolerant and diverse country than it was in the past. Now, again, a thing, um, unchecked diversity, you know, diversity without assimilation is not a good thing. Um, so this is all contextual, but I think overall it's something to be welcomed. Specifically on Rishi Sunak, well, actually, let's talk about recent prime ministers. Now, we've had five conservative prime ministers in 8 years. Okay, that's we can no longer sort of say Italy is the unstable country of Europe. That is not good. It looks unstable. It looks like it's beset by infighting. There'll be other, you know, we could talk about this post analysis, this post mortem of why the Tory failed. But let's look at Brexit, the B word, which surprisingly had very little mention during its campaign. But anyway, with that, I'm not going to say good or bad. I honestly think it's too early to tell. I'm not convinced it was the right decision. I'm not convinced that it was a wonderful thing, but nor do I say it was a total disaster. And both sides exaggerated, Um, the Leavers really made it out to be, magic Brexit will solve everything. It certainly has not done that. But at the same time, there was a lot of doom mongering from some Remainers. And, if you look at a publication like the New European, it is overtly cynical and negative. I think that's, we haven't fallen off the cliff. We haven't imploded. We still have a lot of trade with countries. So it's not as bad as it's been made out to be. But I think overall that's a 50-50 thing. I just think it's too early to tell. Um, Rishi Sunak, I do give him some credit. He, helped to draft the Windsor Framework, the Northern Ireland Protocol. Is it perfect? No. Are the Ulster Unionists overly happy with it? No. But at the same time, it does respect the sovereign integrity of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland being part of the United Kingdom. Um, these things are not easy to negotiate. I mean, look at the way Theresa May got pilloried constantly by her party when she was trying her level best, in my opinion. But Rishi Sunak did achieve that. It's not perfect, but it is better than nothing. Now, on foreign policy, I think that there has been a sort of liberal interventionist approach, not dissimilar to Blairism actually, with David Cameron and his successors. We saw that in Syria, Libya, um, Afghanistan. People will, well, actually, that was earlier, but there will be some critics of Western foreign policy, and they will frame it in such a way as to say this is colonialist wars, this is all about oil, etc., etc., etc. I maintain that when a dictator is slaughtering his own people, the notion of doing nothing is not leadership. It just isn't. So I know this is a controversial opinion, but I think David Cameron was right to intervene in Libya. I think he was right to intervene in Syria. The fact that Libya is a mess, I don't think you can say that's David Cameron's fault. Whose fault is it? It's the fault of the brutal dictator who put down legitimate protests. What makes me angry about these situations is people blame those who intervene. I was watching, I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but I was watching Hotel Rwanda the other day. Now, the big criticism of that situation was the world did not intervene. And, up to 1 million people died in 100 days. So, with the situation following Arab Spring, that was a global event. It then became Arab Winter. It's easy to forget that David Cameron and Nicolas Sarkozy were cheered in Benghazi. Now, I'm not going to say that those campaigns were triumphalist and everything went well, but I question those who say we should have done nothing. And I think that's one of the toughest decisions a leader has to make, to intervene or not. Um, I maintain that when you have basically mass killings taking place, when you have a dictator who is out of control, the idea, "oh, just leave them to it," is unfathomable. I have never accepted that. That's why I think that successive prime ministers from Theresa May onwards deserve credit for the line they took with Russia. Theresa May took decisive action against, following Salisbury. Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and Rishi Sunak all took a tough line with Russia regarding Ukraine. I don't think Priti Patel handled it well. Some of the Home Office bureaucracy at that time was a disgrace. When other European countries were opening up the doors to refugees, we were, ticking the T's and what is it, ticking the I's and ticking the. You get my point. Um, so sometimes there is that computer says no attitude from the Home Office, but the support that the successive governments in this country have offered, and that will continue with Keir Starmer, is absolutely the right approach to take. Farage's attitude of blaming everything on the West is nonsense. And Boris Johnson was right. It does play into the Kremlin's playbook. So I do think the Conservatives got that right, taking a hard line against Putin and his regime, recognizing it for what it is. What they haven't got so right is China. They flip flopped on that. During the Hong Kong situation, Dominic Raab did recall the Chinese ambassador, and the rhetoric's been toughening a little bit. But David Cameron and George Osborne opened that golden era, which now turns out to be a retrospective mistake, a big one. I am disappointed. I do think successive governments could have done a lot more. I am not overly confident that Starmer's government will be any better, but they have to be. But regarding Russia, at least, I do think successive premierships have taken a hard line on this, and that is the right approach because Putin has proven he cannot be trusted. Um, so it's the right approach to take. This isn't just sort of bellicose rhetoric, oh, we'll be tough and that's it. There is actually an ideological, no, not an ideological, actually a practical reality to that, which is that appeasement does not work. Appeasing Putin will endanger this country. So I think they were right to take that stance, and I think Starmer's right to continue it. Um, the London Olympics, that was a rare moment of optimism and joy in this country. It was largely successful. Um, there were a few issues over some of the workers employed around the stadium and 0 hour contracts and so on, but no one could deny that that opening ceremony, credit to Danny Boyle, was a resounding triumph. Um, Now, to be fair, New Labour also has to take some credit here because in their final years they also pushed for London to get the Olympics. It was 2005, indeed, when London was awarded the Olympics. So that again is a credit to the Blair government. But it went smoothly. It was generally seen, I think, as one of the better Olympics. That was on David Cameron's watch. So, credit where credit's due. I'm not saying the government takes all the responsibility for that. There's a lot of other people involved. But, it was a moment of optimism. It was a good thing. Um, a moment of national pride. So, yeah, I would say that was positive. But anyway, I'll wrap this up. So it's difficult to look at the Tories 14 years and say that was a resounding success. It clearly wasn't. But I think a fair analyst will look at it and say, well, actually, there were some things that weren't so bad, and they got that right, or they got this right. It may be when Labour is scrutinised, particularly when it comes to the culture wars. I think if Labour goes very woke, Tony Blair's advised against, people will look a little bit back at the Tories and think, well, they weren't that way. It's one thing they got right. The left often accuses conservatives of pushing the culture wars, which I think is damn rich, since they're the ones who, it's leftist culture warriors who are using these divisive terms um, that really created defensiveness in the first place. So anyway, that's that's maybe for another video, but um, it's difficult to look at the last 14 years with overt optimism. Clearly, it hasn't been that way, but I think broadly speaking, if I were to summarize it, I would say Cameron's big society definitely didn't look that way because austerity hit some of the most vulnerable the hardest. It did damage public resources. Um, I do think there is, for all the compassion and the improvements in terms of diversity and tolerance, there is still a callousness to the Conservative Party. Like I say, particularly around welfare sanctions and the way the disabled were treated. I think that's appalling. Um, Brexit, time will tell. Okay, it may turn out to be a wonderful success. Then Boris Johnson will be hailed as a great prime minister. I don't think that time is now because of all the sleaze that is attached to him. Um, so really, I try to be fair to every leader, even Liz Truss, right? The prime minister of 49 days. She's never going to be seen as a great prime minister. She's just lost her seat. But even Liz Truss has been consistently hardline regarding Beijing, and she's absolutely right about that. It's one area I do think Liz Truss deserves credit. Anyway, I don't even think Sunak was that bad a prime minister, just that he had the misfortune of being the last conservative. Okay, let me know your thoughts. I'd particularly like to hear if you're a Conservative Party member, what do you think successes were? Um, as someone who believes strongly in the issue of law and justice and that area, I think they definitely could have done better. Um, but there were some areas, the public order bill to tackle just stop oil, if it was justified. I can't say it was a great success because it wasn't really implemented as much as it should have been. But a lot of that's come down to the distortion that it was, banning freedom to protest. It was nothing of the sort. Um, because we have to remember in a democracy, you cannot blame all problems on the government. There's different parties involved. Um, anyway, I'll wrap this up, but if I were to rank the Tories out of 10 for the last 14 years, I couldn't give them more than 5, really. They didn't get everything wrong, but I couldn't give them more than 5 out of 10.